Good evening. Insights of Rav Soloveichik for Parshas Shelach. Last year, we discussed at great length the chait of the Meraglim, many dimensions and causes for the sin of the Meraglim. This year, we want to start from post the Meraglim, the follow-up to the Meraglim. And we begin in Perek Yudalid. You could open up to Bamidbar Perek Yudalid, and we're going to look at Pasuk Chav Gimel. So we're in 14:24. Well, let's go back actually one Pasuk earlier to Pasuk Chav Gimel. I'm just going to try to mute if I can. And in Pasuk Chav Gimel, it says, "Im yiru es haaretz asher nishbati lavosam," as God swears that they will not see the land of their forefathers. And then it says, "V'chol min atzai lo yiruha," and all those who provoke me will not see the land. Now, sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu plays the role of what I would call a pedagogue. And he's teaching us. There's a message here, I believe, in Hashem's teaching about those who provoke me. And what we're talking about is someone who is kafui tova, he's ungrateful. Hashem wants to teach us that if you don't appreciate what you have, then sometimes I'm going to have to take it away from you. And when I do that, you'll appreciate what you once had and no longer have. So, for example, in the case of Bnei Yaakov, the Shvatim, the brothers of Yosef, they sold Yosef. It's only after he was sold and they were missing him for so long that they realized they're unhappy. They realized that something great was taken away from them. And Hashem, whenever we are not grateful and we don't appreciate what we have, Hashem might take it away from us in order to educate us to have a sense of gratitude, to recognize the great things that we have. And perhaps this is the introduction to Pasuk Lamed Tes. If you take a look, fast forwarding to Pasuk Lamed Tes, Vayidaber Moshe sadvarim ha'elel kol bnei Yisrael vayis'ablu ha'am me'od. And the Pasuk testifies to the fact that the people mourned greatly. What is mourning? What is grief all about? We talk about the sorrow of mourning a loss. And the halacha goes into great detail with nuances of laws about someone who's an avel, the laws of mourning. A person loses something, someone who's so precious. In the case of the loss of a job, of money, of finances, property, that's not considered a real loss. A real loss is Rachmana litzlan, the loss of a beloved person. That's where the laws of Avelus apply. We react with nostalgia, with yearning. We have memories. We realize that something and someone was taken away from us, somebody very precious to us. That's what mourning and Avelus is all about. A person loses someone and he feels very lonely. And he has memories. And he's not able to eradicate those memories. He lives with those memories of the past. And those memories generate feelings of grief, of Avelus, of mourning, because man no longer has the blessings that he has. And those very blessings that he once had now become a curse for him because he's constantly reliving and re-experiencing those blessings, those wonderful moments and memories that he has. And now, unfortunately, he's totally surrounded by feelings of grief and bereavement. Imagine the case of a man who gets used to coming home every night, being greeted by his wife with a wonderful smile. They eat together, they share the day's excitements, the ups and the downs. And now he comes back to his house. He opens up the same exact door. Everything is the same. The furniture is the same. Nothing has changed. But yet everything has changed. Everything might be in exactly the same place. He finds the key in his pocket. He pulls it out. He opens the door. He comes in. But there's only peace and quiet. There's no one there to greet him. It's heartbreaking. This is what mourning is all about. His entire being is engulfed with bereavement because life is not the same. It looks like it's the same, but it's not at all. Vayisabalu ha'am mi'od. The people were in a deep state of grief and mourning. And why so? Because they too had lost something great. Before the Chet of the Meraglim, there was an intimacy between the Ribono Shel Olam and the people of Israel. They realized now, after the terrible punishment and the Gzera, the decree against the people, that their sin had lowered them. They felt almost disgusted by themselves. How was I capable of doing this sin? How did I give up my purity, my inspiration, my high level of spirituality, my closeness to Hashem, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The same person in mourning over the loss of a dear one, realizing that his life is not the same, is the same mourning of a sinner, of a chote, who realizes that his very being is no longer the same. He has given up his good reputation, his integrity, his honesty, and his purity. Where is the spirit of sanctity that engulfed him before the sin, the kedusha, and now everything that gave so much meaning to his life and uplifted him is gone? And just like the mourner is bereaved of the loss of his soulmate, so too the sinner is bereaved over the loss of his soul. There's an element in mourning which the psychologists emphasize as masochism. A mourner is very down on himself, punishing himself, torturing himself. He hates himself. And in the case of sin, clearly there's an element of masochism, of self-hatred. The chote feels contempt and hatred towards himself. Why did I do this? This abomination. He finds his own self in the mirror, revolting. He has lost his sense of confidence in himself. All these feelings are generated by sin. Where is my moral self? How could I have lowered myself, dragged myself down to this low level? And these feelings of self-hatred are meant to bring a person to a sensation, to arouse a person to tshuva, Man has a natural desire to feel beautiful about himself. And now he's feeling negative about himself. Man has an aesthetic sense. He hates anything that's ugly, and he feels about himself after sin that he's ugly. He has immersed himself in filth and abomination. So the suffering of the sinner, that feeling of nausea, of being nauseated by himself, by the defiling impact of sin, this is what draws him away from sin. This is perhaps the natural response that's going to prevent him from falling a second time around. And the sinner realizes that God is there to bring him out of the mud, so to speak. That God is arousing within him his moral awareness and drawing him and elevating him to the level of tshuva. I'd like to talk to you about Pasuk Daled, if you could turn to Perek Tesvav, V'kriv ha'makriv karbano l'Hashem, mincha solis isaron balul b'revius hayayin shomer. The one who brings the offering to God shall present a meal offering, and it's made up of 1/10 of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of oil. What is it about mincha, both the carbon mincha that we're dealing with here in the pasuk and tfilas mincha, which today is a replacement for the carbon mincha? What makes it so unique? Why do Chazal emphasize time and time and again how careful one should be about davening mincha? Shachris is made up of a sense of gratitude to God for the basics, for that which is absolutely critical in human life and human existence, for the ability to see, to walk, to breathe, to stand tall. This is an expression of gratitude for man's basic existence. The Gemara uses the term mispalal bimchem. He is thanking Hashem for dam. Dam means his source of life, for the very air that he breathes, his very existence. That is typical of the thanksgiving of Shachris. What is mincha? The pasuk says that mincha is a solas isar bol b'yayin, revius hahin shemen. Yayin is not a basic necessity. A person could survive without wine. But let me ask you this: when a person goes out to eke out a living, is he happy? Is he satisfied if he makes just the basic bare bones living? He has enough money to put food on his table to continue to sustain his family and survive? For sure not. Man strives for more than that. He wants the comforts of life, the luxuries of life. I'll speak about a sense of serenity that man achieves when he has a dirana, he has a nice house, he has kelim noim, he's got clothes to wear that are beautiful. The yayin of mincha is a different type of thanksgiving in which man recognizes and expresses his gratitude for the finer things of life, for that higher level beyond just bare bones existence. And therefore the Gemara says in Brachos, Avizoyer, be careful with the mincha prayer, dafka mincha, because it's great to have thanksgiving for the basics and that which is critical. And we certainly continue to pray and thank Hashem every morning, Shachris, the Birchas HaShachar, etc., for that which we need and the basic necessities of life. But at the same time, we want to go beyond that. We want to thank Hashem and recognize the great chesed that he bestows upon us for those finer things in life. Why is this pasuk, why does this verse appear of the yayin of a korban mincha in the aftermath of the Chet HaMeraglim? We understand very well that the discussion that we had before about avelus, about grief and mourning, is directly connected to the people of Israel after the Chet HaEgel, Vayisabalu ha'am ma'od. And they were mourning over the loss of their soul, as we spoke earlier. But what's the connection to the mincha? And the answer, I believe, is that the Meraglim declared this land is Eretz Ocheles Yoshvea. It eats up, devours, and consumes its inhabitants. We have adversaries. And even if we'll successfully defeat our adversaries, they'll always be there to pressure us. We're going to be living in a state of constant bombardment, always in fear, security issues all around us. Therefore, the Meraglim argued we might survive, we might achieve the basic necessities of life if we're lucky enough. But because of the constant pressure and the lack of security, we will never be able to really financially reach a higher level, a level of enjoying the luxuries of life. That's why the Torah gives the mitzvah of Niskei Yayin, of the wine libations in the Korban Mincha, right here at this juncture, to tell the Meraglim that Eretz Yisrael has more than just the basic necessities. It has the yayin of a much more beautiful existence, the finer things in life, not just sustenance, not just bare existence, but to improve one's living standard and reach a higher level. And that's represented by yayin. And we fast forward now, Pasuk Yud Ches. We finish with the parsha of Niskei Yayin, and we are introduced to the parsha of Chal. And the pasuk says, "Daber el bnei Yisrael v'martu b'voachem el haaretz asher ani mevi eschem shom v'hoya b'cholchem ilech haaretz tarimu truma lashem." Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them, when you arrive in the land that I'm bringing you to, you will eat from the bread of the land. You will set aside a gift for the Lord. And this is the mitzvah of Chal. Why is this mitzvah introduced at this juncture in the aftermath of the sin of the Meraglim? And I think the answer is simple, but yet very profound. The Torah introduces the mitzvah of Chala when you arrive in the land. Now, we found at the end of Parshas Korach the mitzvah of Truma, the mitzvah of Maser. We have to give the Kohen his share, the Levi his share. And Ramban here points out that these mitzvos were transmitted to people of Israel at this juncture to tell them that they will inherit the land. Despite what the Meraglim were claiming, that we have a zero chance of defeating our enemies, you will go into the land. You will achieve those mitzvahs. It may take a little bit longer. There may be delays. We may be 40 years in the desert, but ultimately your children will inherit the land, and they will produce from the land, and they will be mekayim, they will fulfill the mitzvahs of the land. This is a divine promise that was originally given to the Avos, and now Hashem says you're on the verge of fulfilling these promises, of entering into the land. And when the people of Israel will inhabit the land, the land will produce its wonderful fruits and grains, and we will take these grains and grind them and make challah. This is the divine promise, dafka in the aftermath of Chet HaEgel. And then if you look at the next pasuk, pasuk Chav, Reishis Harisosechem Challah Torim El Hashem, the first portion of your dough, you should celebrate a loaf as a gift. And this is given, of course, to the Kohanim. Now, I'd like to understand the difference between the mitzvah of challah, which depends upon the land, and the mitzvahs of trumos and maisros that we'll have later on in Parshas Korach also depend upon the land. These are agricultural mitzvahs. But there's a very important difference between challah and all the other mitzvos hatluyos ba'aretz. In the cases of trumos, maisros, etc., the land produces and we're obligated. It's tevel until we take off trumos and maisros. Not so in the case of challah. In challah, it's not enough that the land produces the grains, but man has to take those grains, and after a whole process of grinding them and adding water and creating flour and then baking the flour, you have to knead the dough. Reishis Harisosechem means to create an isa with what's called gilgul. Gilgul means when you knead the dough. There's a human element here. It's not just the land itself. And this mitzvah of challah, which is a combination of the land and man's action as he kneads the dough and bakes the bread, is perfectly situated here in the aftermath of the Chet and the Meraglim. In the Meraglim and their report, they spoke about the weakness and the inadequacy of man, of the people of Israel, to face and overcome all the barriers and the obstacles of the enemies and the adversaries. They admitted that the fruit of the land was wonderful. But can you really enjoy the fruit of the land when you'll be overwhelmed by the people living in fortifications that are impenetrable? Therefore, what the Meraglim was saying is that the land itself is good, but we, as the active agent, do not have the capacity, the ability to enjoy the fruits of the land. That's where the mitzvah of challah comes in. And the mitzvah of challah is saying that not only will the land give bounty and produce its grains, but not only that, man will succeed in bringing challah, in creating a mitzvah called challah, meaning the land itself will bestow upon man brachos, such that man's efforts will bring about a tremendous blessing in the midst of challah. Don't accept the falsifications of the Meraglim in saying that man has no capacity, that the land is blessed, but man is not blessed. No, 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 no. The blessing of the land will impact on the people living in the land. And when the Jewish nation will settle in the land, the impact of the land will be such that they will produce this beautiful, wonderful mitzvah of challah. And now, beginning with Pasuk Chav Beis, the Torah takes a little bit of a turn here. This is called a Parshas Stuma, but it's really a separate parsha. And it starts in Pasuk Chav Beis, V'chi tishgu v'lo ta'asu es kol mitzvos ha'eleh. And what we should really be doing here is comparing this pasuk to a pasuk in Vayikra, in the fourth chapter of Sefer Vayikra, pasuk Yud Gimel. That's the parsha of what's called Par Helem Dover Shel Tzibur. It means that the elders in the highest court of Sanhedrin gave permission, mistakenly, to violate a chiyuv kares, a very severe violation of an avera. And when the mistake was brought to light, the tzibur, the community of Israel, in order to atone for its sin, has to bring a par lechatos. What is unique about this pasuk here in Perek Tes Vav of Sefer Bamidbar, pasuk Chaf Beis, with a new parsha? And if you take a look, fast forwarding to pasuk of Dalid, it says V'yasu kol ha'eda par ben bakar, and it's a korban olah. It's not a korban chatos. Useiri zemechad lechatos. It's not a par lechatos. It's a seir lechatos. Obviously, this parsha is addressing a different scenario than that of the par helim davar shel tzibur. What is the difference? And the most important difference is that in the case of the par helim davar shel tzibur, the Torah speaks about violating a particular mitzvah. Here, it says v'chisish guvelo sasu es kol mitzvah, referring not to one specific mitzvah, but to a mistaken ruling about all the mitzvahs. What situation, what scenario, ask Chazal, could possibly be a violation of all the mitzvahs? And Chazal answered that this parsha is about a mistaken violation of avodah zarah, of idolatry. And the people of Israel, based on a mistaken ruling, actually worshipped idolatry. And that's called lo tasu es kol ha-mitzvahs ha'eleh. There's one avera that is tantamount to all the mitzvahs. If a person worships an idol, he is basically kofar, he denies God, and he denies the entire Torah. So if the tzibur violates any particular avera that yesh bo kares, it's a severe avera because of the mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin, then they have to bring a par lechatos. In the case where they violated one avera, but that avera is considered a violation of the entire Torah of eskol mitzvahs, and that means avodah zarah, then they bring a sayer lechatos, and in addition to the sayer lechatos, they bring a parli olah. Now this is very strange. A parli olah, a korban olah, is classically what we call a doron. Doron means a gift. You want to bring a gift to Hashem, you bring an olah. In general speaking, a person volunteers to bring a korban, it's going to be a korban olah. But why are we bringing a gift to Hashem in the context of the atonement for the most severe violation, which is kiddush as kol mitzvahs, which is avodah zarah? Bring a korban mincha? Very strange. The Ramban, in his commentary here, is aware of this problem, and he goes on with his theory. I would like to suggest that when a sinner does tshuva, in addition to all the feelings of remorse and regret and painfully feeling the introspection, there's also an element of joy. What is the joy of a sinner who comes to atone? It's the fact that he realizes, he acknowledges that God has brought him to the state of tshuva, that God has not given up on him. And that brings him to a state of simcha, of joy. On the one hand, man is drowning in sin, experiencing all of that broken-hearted mourning and avelus that we spoke about earlier. But on the other hand, paradoxically, he experiences happiness and joy because he reflects upon the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, Ani Hashem Kodem Achet, in the 13 attributes of kindness, of chesed, the midos of chesed, Hashem, Hashem, the first two midos are the name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah, Tzadi Hashem, Kodem Shechata, Ani Hashem Liachar Shechata. Even though man sins, God is with him, and God doesn't give up on him. And God arouses him to do tshuva, and that gives him a sense of simcha, of joy and happiness. God has not abandoned the sinner. If God abandoned the sinner, then probably the sinner would give up on himself. He would never really come to do tshuva. He would not be motivated with a sense of remorse for his deeds. But therefore, the Baal Tshuva rejoices because he merits the ability, the power to return to Hashem. That is the joy of Ani Hashem Liachar Achet, that God did not abandon him. But here, in this context of joy, we can talk about three different categories. One category is when the entire public is guilty of a certain crime and they all want to do tshuva. Another case is where he is on his own as an individual. He violates a severe chiyuv kares and now he wants to bring a korban chatos. In those two cases, either where the entire tzibur, the whole community, violated an avera, or he as an individual violated an avera, a korban chatos is enough. He doesn't feel that sense of joy. He realizes that if he sinned, then he's got the entire tzibur around him. They're going to bring him and arouse him to do tshuva. He doesn't appreciate the Ani Hashem Liachar Achet, that he needs God's help because he has help from all of his friends. And if the entire tzibur violated together the same avera, then once again, he doesn't feel that sense of joy. He's lost in the sea of people. He's no better or worse than everybody else. We're all going to bring a joint effort, a chatas shel tzibur, which is called the parahelim dava shel tzibur. But there's one scenario in which he absolutely must feel that simcha. And that's the case of Avodah Zarah. Because if the entire tzibur worshipped Avodah Zarah, it means as a community, they denied the existence of one God. And there's no one around who can take him out of this quagmire, who can arouse him to do tshuva. It's got to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When the entire public commits this serious crime, this heinous crime of Avodah Zarah, and it involves completely removing the old Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of heaven, there's no one there to convince him that his actions are wrong. They will not come to this realization on their own. Therefore, the Torah says it's not enough to bring a korban chatos. You have to bring a korban olah, because here is a clear-cut case in which a person has the simcha, the joy, and the happiness of recognizing God's role in his coming to do tshuva. It was the Ani Hashem Liachar Achet that aroused him to do tshuva, and out of that sense of joy and happiness, he will bring a korban olah, a doron, a gift to Hashem. And if you take a look for a moment at Rashi, here in Pasuk of Dalid, Rashi lechatos, Rashi points out that the word chatos is written here without an aleph. Chaser aleph, sheina keshar chatos, is something unique about this korban chatos, and it's missing an aleph. In this case, Rashi points out the olah comes first, and then the chatos. So the chatos is missing an aleph to indicate that instead of the normal procedure when a person is chayav both a chatos and an olah, he brings the chatos first, and then the olah. Here, the chatos is deficient, so to speak. It's missing the aleph because the olah is going to come first. It's only the olah that can express gratitude to Hashem for pulling him out of this situation, which is so far from Hashem, where he's involved in worshiping Avodah Zarah. would like to take a look at Pasuk Lamed here in Perek Tesvav. V'nefesh asher taseh biyad Ramah, etc., etc. V'nichrasa hanefesh hahi mikerav Hamah, and that soul shall be cut off from amongst his people. What is the halachic significance of kares? I'm not describing exactly when and how he'll die and all the nuances, but I just want to know on a conceptual level, what is the impact? Obviously, if he did it b'shogeg, because it's a chi of kares b'mezid, he has to bring a karma chatos. But is there something more, something deeper involved in kares? The Rambam writes in Hilchas Tshuva that the Soyer Lazazel of Yom HaKippurim has a unique power of kapara. It's a wide scope, almost all-encompassing kapara. And the Rambam writes that Soyer HaLazazel is a carbon al Shem Kol Yisrael, mechaper bein al kalos v'al chamuros, on lower violations and even on more severe violations. The Rambam mentions nothing about tshuva. The Rambam is totally focused on the power of kapara inherent in the Sarya Mishtaleh. The Rambam, I'll get back to this in just a minute, has one exceptional case, one Avera, meaning one category, I should say, of an Avera, where the carbon of Sarya Lazazel cannot effectuate kapara. But we'll get back to that in just a minute. When the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchas Tshuva discusses what's called the Itzumo Shel Yom, meaning the power of kapara inherent in Yom HaKippurim, the Rambam writes, Itzumo Shel Yom mechaper lashavim. Here, he adds a precondition. The power of Yom HaKippurim to effectuate tshuva is conditional on, to effectuate kapara, is conditional on tshuva. And here the Rambam is paskening like Chachamim in a major controversy between Chachamim and Rebbe. Rebbe was of the opinion that Yom HaKippurim, Itzumo Shel Yom, is mechaper, bein l'shavim, bein l'sheinom shavim. Even if a person is continuing in his ways of evil, Yom HaKippurim, according to Rebbe, continues to effectuate kapara. Chachamim disagree. They require for Yom HaKippurim to be effective, to activate the Itzumo Shel Yom as a mechaper, require tshuva. What is the difference between Itzumo Shel Yom, which can only effectuate tshuva if the sinner is choser b'tshuva? That's how the Rambam is passing like the Chachamim of Rebbe. Whereas the Rambam himself, with regard to the Sarya Mishtalech, does not require tshuva. And the Sarya Mishtalech is mechaper bein lekalos ubein lechamuros. No mention of tshuva, no condition of tshuva. An amazing, almost infinite power of kapara that's inherent in the Sarya Lazazel. There's no Sarya Lazazel, then we're left with Itzumo Shel Yom, but then the Rambam says Lashavim, the kapara effectuated by Yom HaKippurim, the Itzumo Shel Yom, the Kedushas Hayom, is contingent upon tshuva. But let's get back for a moment to Sarya Mishtalech. As I mentioned to you earlier, there's one category of sin which the Rambam admits is beyond the power of the Sarya Mishtalech, and the sorrow cannot be mechaper. What kind of sin is that? The Rambam says, chayve krisus, a sin which is punishable by krisus is not subject, does not lend itself to a kapara even of the Sarah Mishtalech. Why not? And many, many years ago, probably over half a century ago, I gave my tshuva drasha, and I suggested the following approach. The answer to the question lies here in our pasuk. A kares cuts you off from the nation. The power of Sarah Mishtalech is kaparas hatzibur. Every individual member of the tzibur comes with his membership card, and he is a card-carrying member of the tzibur of Klal Yisrael. The kapara of Sarah Mishtalech is a kaparas hatzibur. Anyone who's part of the tzibur will achieve that kapara simply by virtue of the power inherent in the Sarah Mishtalech, and even without tshuva, bein al kalos ubein achamuros. But if you cross the red line and you violate an avera which incurs kares devenichrasa mikerev hama, he's no longer part of the tzibur. He can no longer enjoy the benefit of the kaparas hatzibur inherent in the Sarah Mishtalech because he's not part of the tzibur. He has forfeited his membership in the tzibur. But now we get to Yom Kippur without the Sarah Mishtalech. The Rambam writes in Hilchas Tshuva that Yom Kippurim is the day of Tshuva bein liyachid ubein l'rav. I'll read the language of the Rambam. Yom Kippurim, Perek Beis, Halacha Zayin of Hilchas Tshuva, Huzman Tshuva lakol liyachid u'l'rav. Yom Kippurim requires yachid and then rabin, whereas Sarah Mishtalech is purely a power of kaparas harabim. Yom Kippurim requires, as a precondition, if you want to achieve the kapara of Yom Kippurim, then first you have to have a kapara as a yachid. You have to go through a process of hechsher to be machsher yourself, to make yourself roi, a suitable candidate for the kapara of Yom Kippur. And how do you do that? With tshuva. Obviously, you cannot be cut off from the tzibur. That goes without saying. But even if you violated a lotas that does not generate kares, you ate nevela, or chas v'sholem, you wore shatnez, whatever it might be, you do not have a tshuva of the yachid to achieve your state of kapara and be granted the ability and the merit of dipping in to the tzumot shel yom mechaper, that element of kaparas hatzibur. Both Yom Kippurim and Sarah Mishtalech, they both have a kaparas hatzibur. But in the case of Sarah Mishtalech, that's all there is a kaparas hatzibur. As long as you're part of the tzibur and you didn't do kares, then you will achieve the kapara of the Sarah Mishtalech. But on Yom Kippurim, there are two dimensions. First, you have to have kapara as a yachid. And after you achieve that cathartic experience through tshuva as a yachid, now you are kosher, you are part of the process of kaparas hatzibur. Take a look now at the next pasuk. Hidvar Hashem boza, ves mitzvoso hefer, hikares hanefesh hahi avona ba. For he has scorned the word of the Lord, he has violated his commandment, and that soul shall be cut off for his iniquity. This is the parsha of kfira, of someone who is guilty of just casting off from himself the all of mitzvos. Every Jew is commanded in the very essential obligation of Kabbalas Ol Malchut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven. This individual rejects the yoke of heaven. As a result, v'nichrasa, he's chayav kares. But let me ask the following question. We have a basic rule that if a person violates an avera, b'mezid he's chayav kares, b'shogeg he brings a korban chatas. We never found anywhere that a person who's porek ol, and he simply rejects the responsibility and the sovereignty, the yoke of heaven, and he brings a korban chatas. After all, if he's chayav, in the case of mezid, he's chayav kares, then in shogeg he should be chayav chatas. We never found such. But the answer is very important. Every other avera which has a chiyuv kares b'mezid, the person is guilty of a ma'isa avera. There's an action, and he ate chelev, or he had a relationship with an erva. There's an action, and that action, if implemented b'shogeg, generates an obligation of kapara, which manifests itself in a korban chatas. But not so in this context. In this pasuk, his chiyuv kares is not because of an action, but rather because of an attitude. Nothing specific that he has done is a violation of any particular avera in the Torah. He's just casting off the yoke of mitzvahs. He demonstrates a disregard for the Torah. He's an apikoros, he's a heretic. But the penalty for an apikoros is kares. However, the penalty of kares here, in this case, of a porek al malchus shamayim, is not a result of a specific action. It's a result of his change in personality. It's a question of who he is. He's no longer a Jew who's committed to implement the will of God and fulfill his mitzvahs. He's chayav kares if he was deliberate. But if he didn't have the upbringing, if he was denied the education, if he was a shogeg, and these are mitigating circumstances beyond his control, then there's no chiyuv korban chatas, because chatas is generated by a specific violation, an action. Here there was no specific violation. Last year, we spoke at great length about the beginning of the parsha and the end of the parsha. We tried to combine and connect the two, the beginning of the parsha, the chet of the meraglim, the end of the parsha, the mitzvah of tzitzis. And you may recall that we spoke about tzitzis as an integration of white and tchelis. Tchelis is a darker color, which represents a subject matter that's not clear. It's something that is very abstract. It reminds you of the kisei hakavod. It's transcendental, whereas the white color of the chutei lavan of tzitzis, that represents mechuvar. Mechuvar means that which is clear, rational, distinct, self-evident, that which I can define in human terms, in mathematical and scientific terms. However, tcheles reflects on something that's beyond the reach of man. And we connected this back to the beginning of the parsha of the meraglim. And we can connect it also to next week's parsha of Korach, because Korach, if you remember, dressed up his people, each one wearing a talashik kula tchelis, and scoffing Moshe by saying, do I need to add tchelis to a garment that's made up of totally tchelis? It's got all the tchelis. You have to add one chut of tchelis. That's the way Korach made fun of Moshe Rabbeinu and his religion and his discipline in learning, defining the law. So that's clear that the end of Parshas Shelach and the mitzvah of tzitzis is a jumping point that projects us into Parshas Korach. Korach is going to emphasize this lack of clarity, chas v'shalom, in halacha, in the Katalas Shekula Tchilas. What then do we say about the Chet HaMaraglim that might connect us to the Tcheles at the end of the parsha? I want to say Shalom Aleichem to Ben. And what I think is going on here is that the Meraglim thought of themselves as the highest integration of both Cheles and Lavan. In their minds, they achieved such great things. They were all, as the Pasuk testifies, the great leaders of Israel. In the writings, the mystical writings of the Ari, they were on the highest level. And they gave themselves credit, almost like a pat on the back, feeling complacent about where they were and the highest level that they achieved. They could combine Lavan with Cheles because even those esoteric and ambiguous areas of Torah that are shrouded in clouds and that seem to defy human rational understanding, they had achieved even that level of Tcheles, of Kisei HaKavod. Imagine, it's just mind-boggling. You're talking about a group of 10 people that are on such a high level, they're up in the Kisei HaKavod. They're the absolute great leaders of their generation. How could they fall? But you know what? No one can claim that he can reach the Kisei HaKavod. Not even a Moshe Rabbeinu. God is infinite. No matter how deep and how rational our understanding is, how profound we understand, and whatever levels we get to and achieve, it's nothing. It's endless. There's one level after the other after the other. You can never get to the point where you pat yourself on the back and say, well, I'm on the highest level. I don't need Eretz Yisrael. I can stay put here in the Midbar. Don't bother with me. I've reached that level. And the higher a person achieves, the greater and more intense is the Yetzer Hara that tries to trip him and seduce him, convince him to believe that he is on that high level, that he doesn't have to come off that high level and interrupt and come down to the level of the people. And this was the critical era of the great people, the leaders of Israel that were the Meraglim. Ye Ratzah be his will, that we appreciate the sin of the Meraglim, we should put it into perspective and be inspired. The Avelus of Klal Yisrael, that national mourning in the aftermath of the Chet HaMeraglim, when the people felt self-hatred, if you will. They had a sense of repulsion. Why did I reach this low level? These are messages that we have to take to heart. And we have to realize that everything and all our commitment has got to be absolute to the Ribono Shel Olam, to his will, and to the mandates of the Torah. And no matter how great we may think and level that we achieved, there's so much infinite more level to achieve. And we have to realize that the Torah expects a sinner to do tshuva, never, heaven forbid, to be cut off from the people of Israel through Kores, always to connect to the people and achieve the Kaparas HaTzibur, to thank Hashem and acknowledge that God is with us, Ani Hashem even liachar achet, and He will uplift us, and He will be with us even after sin, in order to arouse us to do tshuva, Yiratzam et His will, that we dedicate ourselves to the love of Hashem, to appreciate it in a sense of deep, profound gratitude that Hashem is always with us, and that in every situation, He is beckoning us to do tshuva, to come back into His chayt. And if we do so, then Amir Hashem will be worthy of nachas ruach lamala, of Hashem taking us closer and closer to Him, and ascending the spiritual ladder, Kedi Ratzon. Amen. Thank you, and let me wish you all a wonderful Shabbos Parshas Shelach. For us, here in the Berzon family, it's a special occasion. Our son Binyamin is making a bar mitzvah for his oldest son.
Oh, wow.
We won't be in the Amic Learning Center, but we're there with you in spirit, and we should always share great news together.
Mazal tov,
Great.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much.
Mazal tov.
Mazal
Ken.
tov, Mazal tov.
Thank you so much.
Toda rabba. Thank you for everything.